All right, we're going to continue exploring Chapter 6, which is titled Privacy and the Government. And in particular, we're going to cover, in this lecture at least, cover sections 6.7 up to and through section 6.9. So section 6.7 is titled Regulation of Public and Private Databases. And in this section, we're going to switch our focus to the information processing category of Solov's taxonomy of privacy. And our coverage of issues related to information processing and the government will continue through section 6.9. Once organizations have collected information, they can manipulate and use it in a variety of ways, and some of these uses have privacy implications. We're going to begin by describing the social conditions that led to the creation of the Code of Fair Information Practices and the passage of the Privacy Act of 1974. And then we will then move on to legislation that regulates databases managed by private organizations. So in 1965, the director of the Bureau of the Budget commissioned a consulting committee composed largely of economists to look at problems caused by the decentralization of statistical data across many federal agencies. The Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Statistical Reporting Service, and the Economic Research Service of the Department of Agriculture maintained their own independent computer databases, making it impossible, or virtually impossible, for economists and other social scientists to combine information about individuals. And after the committee recommended the creation of a national data center, there was an immediate outcry from citizens and legislators expressing concerns about the possible abuses of a massive centralized government database containing detailed information about millions of Americans. The U.S. House of Representatives created the Special Subcommittee on Invasion of Privacy, which held hearings about these issues. In the early 1970s, Elliot Richardson, who was the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, convened a group to recommend policies for the development of government databases that would protect the privacy of American citizens. The Secretary's Advisory Committee of Automated Personal Data Systems, Records, Computers, and the Rights of Citizens produced a report for Congress that included the following Bill of Rights for the information age, which was called the Code of Fair Information Practices. So number 1, no secret databases. 2, people should have access to personal information in databases. 3, organizations cannot change how information is used without consent. 4, people should be able to correct or amend records. 5, database owners, users responsible, so the database owners and the users will be responsible for the reliability of the data and preventing misuse. At about the same time that the Richardson Committee was established in the United States, similar efforts were underway in Europe. Sweden, for example, passed privacy laws. Sweden passed privacy laws consistent with fair information practices in 1973, and later that decade, the Federal Republic of Germany and France followed suit. The Privacy Act of 1974 represents Congress's codification of the principles described in the Code of Fair Information Practices. The Privacy Act has the following principal limitations. 1, it applies only to government databases. So far More information is held in private databases, which are excluded. And of course, this is an enormous loophole because government agencies can purchase information from private organizations that have the data they want. Two, the Privacy Act only covers records indexed by a personal ID. So, for example, a former IRS agent tried to gain access to a file containing derogatory information about himself, but the judge ruled he did not have a right to see the file since it was indexed under the name of another IRS employee. Thirdly, there are no federal employees are responsible for enforcing Privacy Act provisions. So federal agencies have taken it upon themselves to determine which databases they can exempt. And the Department of Justice has announced that the FBI does not have to ensure the reliability of the data in its NCIC databases. And the fourth way the Privacy Act seems to fall short is that it allows agencies to share records with other agencies. So each agency is able to decide for itself what routine use means or acceptable use. And the Department of Justice has encouraged agencies to define routine use as broadly as possible. So although the Privacy Act applies only to government databases, Congress has also passed legislation regulating how some private institutions manage databases containing sensitive information about individuals, and these laws put into effect many of the principles of the Code of Fair Information Practices. And so in the remainder of this section, we're going to survey some of the most influential of these laws. They have to do with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, and the Financial Services Modernization Act. So credit bureaus and other consumer reporting agencies maintain information on your bill paying record, whether you've been sued or arrested, and if you've filed for bankruptcy. They sell reports to other organizations that are trying to determine the credit worthiness of consumers who are applying for credit, applying for a job, or trying to rent an apartment. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, which was passed in 1970 and then revised in 1996, was designed to promote the accuracy and privacy of information used by credit bureaus and other consumer reporting agencies to produce consumer reports. It also ensures that negative information does not haunt a consumer for a lifetime. The three major credit bureaus are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. According to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, these credit bureaus may keep negative information about a consumer for a maximum of 7 years. But there are several exceptions to this rule. The two most important are that information about criminal convictions may be kept indefinitely, and bankruptcy information may be held for 10 years. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act of 2004 requires the three major credit bureaus to provide consumers a free copy of their credit report every 12 months. And then consumers can use this opportunity to detect and correct errors in their credit reports. The bureaus do not issue the reports automatically, however. Consumers must take the initiative and request them from annualcreditreport.com. The law also has provisions to reduce identity theft. It requires the truncation of account numbers on credit card receipts, and it establishes the National Fraud Alert System. Victims of identity theft may put a fraud alert on their credit files, warning credit card issuers that they must take reasonable steps to verify the requester's identity before granting credit. The Financial Services Modernization Act, also called the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999, contains dozens of provisions related to how financial institutions do business. One of the major provisions of the law allows the creation of financial supermarkets, which offer banking, insurance, and brokerage services. The law also contains some privacy related provisions. It requires financial institutions to disclose their privacy policies to their customers. And when a customer establishes an account, and at least once per year thereafter, the institution must let the customer know the kinds of information it collects and how it uses that information. These notices must contain an opt-out clause that explains to customers how they can request that their confidential information not be revealed to other companies. The law requires financial institutions to develop policies that prevent unauthorized access to their customers' confidential information. Section 6.8 is titled Data Mining by the Government. So in this section, we're going to continue our coverage of the information processing category of Solov's taxonomy by surveying a few well-known data mining projects run by government agencies. And we'll also consider the harms that can result when data mining algorithms create erroneous profiles of individuals. So data mining is the process of searching through one or more databases, looking for patterns or relationships among that data. To identify taxpayers who have paid less in taxes than they owe, the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, uses computer matching and data mining strategies. So first, it matches information on the tax form with information provided by employers and financial institutions. This is a straightforward way to detect unreported income. And then second, the IRS audits a couple of million tax returns every year, and its goal is to select the most promising returns, those containing errors resulting in underpayment of taxes. And then the IRS uses an algorithm called the discriminant function, or the DIF, to score every tax return. The DIF score is an indicator of how many irregularities there are on a tax form compared to carefully constructed profiles of correct tax returns. And about 60% of tax returns audited by the IRS are selected due to their high DIF scores. Another application of data mining by the government is protecting society from imminent dangers. A syndromic surveillance system is a computerized system that analyzes 911 calls, visits to the emergency room, school absenteeism, purchases of prescription drugs, and internet searches to find patterns that might indicate the onset of an epidemic, an environmental problem leading to illnesses, or bioterrorism. In the fall of 2002, a syndromic surveillance system in New York City detected a surge in people seeking treatment for vomiting and diarrhea. These symptoms were the first signs of an outbreak of a Norwalk-type virus. The alert generated by the system allowed city officials to warn doctors about the outbreak and advised them to be particularly careful about handling the highly contagious bodily fluids of their affected patients. Now, after September 11 of 2001, several major telecommunications providers began voluntarily turning over the phone call records of tens of millions of Americans to the National Security Agency without a court order. And the NSA, or the National Security Agency, was not monitoring or recording the actual conversations. Instead, it was analyzing calling patterns in order to detect potential terrorist networks. After US Today revealed the existence of the database in May of 2006, more than a dozen class action lawsuits were filed against the telecommunications companies. In August of 2006, a federal judge in Detroit ruled the program to be illegal and unconstitutional, violating several statutes as well as the First and Fourth Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And then in July of 2007, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit overturned the ruling on the grounds that the plaintiffs did not have standing to bring the suit forward. In other words, the plaintiffs had not produced any evidence that they personally were victims of the program. Predictive policing is the use of data mining to deploy police officers to areas where crimes are more likely to occur. It is based on the observation that individual criminals act in a predictable way. For example, criminals tend to frequent familiar areas. If a car is burglarized, the probability increases that another car in the neighborhood will be burglarized as well. And the times at which crimes occur can also fall into predictable patterns. Police in Santa Cruz, California, created a database of information about vehicular, residential, and commercial burglaries, then used data mining to produce maps containing 15 hotspots to distribute to police officers as they began their shifts. The department asked officers to make a point of passing through the hotspots or the hotspot areas when they were not handling other calls. Over the first 6 months of the experiment, the number of burglaries declined 19%. The Los Angeles Police Department implemented a similar system in an area with 300,000 residents and observed a 12% decline in property crime. Predictive policing is now being practiced in many cities across the United States. Experts have begun to warn about the personal harms that can result when organizations pursue their objectives based on individual profiles they have constructed through data mining. Sometimes those objectives are commercial. For example, as we saw in Chapter 5, Target used data mining to predict which of its customers were pregnant women so that they could use direct mail offers to get these customers into the habit of purchasing a wide variety of items at Target stores. In at least one case, Target sent advertisements for maternity clothing and nursery furniture to a teenage girl before she had told her father she was pregnant. That's pretty incredible. In other situations, the objectives are much more serious. A government agency charged with protecting national security is responsible for preventing harm to the nation, and its employees are strongly motivated to take action before, not after, an attack. So, what happens if a learning algorithm employed by a law enforcement agency mines a massive amount of data and constructs an erroneous profile of an individual, characterizing him or her as a potential terrorist? The amount of data being searched could be so massive and the algorithms manipulating the data so complicated that it might be impossible for any human being to explain why the algorithm has profiled a particular individual as a potential terrorist. How are innocent people who are identified on terrorist watch lists going to be able to clear their names in this sort of a situation? For example, there are now more than 1.5 million names on the U.S. government's terrorist watch list, officially known as the Terrorist Screening Database, and tens of thousands of these names somehow make their way to the government's no-fly list. And many people with common names, including the late Senator Edward Kennedy, and even the author of the required text in this course, have encountered problems boarding commercial flights because their names appear on the no-fly list. Okay, then section 6.9 is titled the National Identification Card, and we know that a great deal can be learned about an individual when information collected at different places and times is combined. So in order to combine information from two or more records, the records must share a common key. A name cannot be used as a common key because more than one person can have the same name, but if every individual had a unique identification number, and that identification number appeared in every database record referring to that individual, then all of these records could theoretically be combined into a massive electronic dossier documenting that person's life. In this section, we're going to survey the debate around the establishment of a national identification card in the United States. The Social Security Act of 1935 established two social insurance programs in the United States. One was a federal system of old age benefits to retired persons, and second, a federal state system of unemployment insurance. Before the system could be implemented, employers and workers needed to become registered. The Social Security Board contracted with the U.S. Postal Service to distribute applications for Social Security cards. The post office collected the forms, typed the Social Security cards, and returned them to the applicants. In this way, over 35 million Social Security cards were issued from 1936 through 1937. The U.S. government initially stated that Social Security numbers would be used solely by the Social Security Administration and not as a national identification number. In 1961, the Internal Revenue Service began using the Social Security number as the taxpayer identification number. Motor vehicle departments and some other state agencies received permission to use Social Security numbers as identification numbers in 1976. The Social Security number is typically requested on applications for credit cards now. The IRS also requires parents to provide the Social Security numbers of their children over 1 year old on income tax forms. And so, for these and other reasons, the Social Security number has become a de facto national identification number in the United States, which that was not its original intent. Unfortunately, the Social Security number has some serious defects that make it a poor identification number, at least as it's being used now. The first problem with Social Security numbers is that they're not always unique. When Social Security cards were first issued by post offices, different post offices accidentally assigned the same Social Security number to different people. A second defect of Social Security numbers is that they are rarely checked. Many, if not most, organizations asking for Social Security numbers do not actually require the applicant to show a card, which makes it easy for criminals to supply fake Social Security numbers. A third defect of Social Security numbers is that they have no error detecting capability, such as a check digit at the end of the number. A check digit enables computer systems to detect common data entry errors, such as getting one digit wrong or transposing two adjacent digits, for example. If someone makes one of these mistakes, the data entry program can detect the error and ask the person to retype the number. But in the case of Social Security numbers, if a person accidentally types in the wrong number, there is a high likelihood that it is a valid Social Security number, just one that is assigned to a different person. So it's easy to contaminate databases with records containing incorrect Social Security numbers. But the events of September 11th, 2001 resurrected the debate over the introduction of a national identification card for Americans. So proponents of the national identification card position point out numerous benefits to its adoption. So we'll look at four. One is that Social Security cards and driver's licenses are too easy to forge, so a modern card could incorporate a photograph as well as a thumbprint or other biometric data. Second, requiring employers to check a tamper-proof, forgery-proof national identification card would prevent illegal immigrants from working in the United States. And third, it's currently too easy for criminals to mask their true identity, but a tamper-proof national identification card would allow police to positively identify the people they apprehend. Fourth, many democratic countries already use national identification cards, such as Belgium, France, Germany, Greece, Luxembourg, Portugal, and Spain. Opponents of the national identification card suggest that the following harms should be taken into consideration that could result from adopting the use of them. So first off, driver's licenses and passports are supposed to be unique identifiers already, but there are many criminals who produce fake driver's license and passports. So even a hard-to-forge identification card system may be compromised by smart insiders. For example, a ring of motor vehicle department employees in Virginia were caught selling fake driver's licenses. So why couldn't the same thing happen with these national ID cards? Second, all known systems suffer from false positives, which means erroneously reporting that the person does not match the ID, and on the other hand, false negatives, which would involve failing to report that the person and the ID do not match. Biometric-based systems may still be beaten then by determined technology-savvy criminals. Third, the principal problem faced by police is not the inability to make positive identifications of suspects, but the inability to obtain evidence needed for a successful prosecution. Fourth, a national identification card makes it simpler for government agencies to perform data mining on the activities of its citizens, which could result in limitless privacy abuses. And fifth, suppose that a teacher, a doctor, or someone else in a position of authority creates a file about an individual that contains misleading or erroneous information. Files created by people in positions of authority can be difficult to remove. So in May of 2005, President George W. Bush signed the REAL ID Act, which is significantly changing driver's licenses in the United States. The motivation for passing the REAL ID Act was to make the driver's license a more reliable form of identification. Critics, however, say the act is creating a de facto national ID card in the United States. The REAL ID Act requires that every state issue new driver's licenses, and these licenses will be needed in order to open a bank account, fly on a commercial airplane, enter a federal building, or receive a government service such as a social security check. So the law makes it more difficult for imposters to get driver's licenses because it requires applicants to supply 4 different kinds of documentation, which is verified by state employees using federal databases. And because the new driver's license contains a biometric identifier, it is supposed to be a stronger credential than previous licenses. And although each state is responsible for issuing new driver's licenses to its citizens, these licenses must meet federal standards. The license must include the person's full legal name, date of birth, gender, driver's license number, digital photograph, legal address, and signature. And then all data on the license must be in machine-readable form. And the license must have physical security features designed to prevent tampering, counterfeiting, or duplication. So supporters of the measure say making the driver's license a more reliable identifier will have numerous benefits. For example, law enforcement will be easier when police can be more certain that a driver's license correctly identifies the individual carrying it. Society is going to be better off when parents ducking child support and criminals on the run cannot change their identities by crossing a state border and getting a new driver's license under a different name. And some critics fear, though, that having machine readable information on driver's licenses will aggravate problems with identity theft. Proponents of the bill say such fears are unjustified. They suggest that the personal information available on the new driver's license is relatively insignificant compared to all the other personal information circulating around cyberspace.